Hi everyone, so my name is André and Sebastian, and we are from Bürgel Labs. And what we are going to do today, we are going to talk a little about the car insurance. So I'm going to make a short intro where I go and I have to put a disclaimer out here. So we are not insurance guys, so obviously there's some experts here. I'm going to just give a rough process, and none of the characters I'm going to use nor the companies exist. They are fictionally made up, right? So the idea is that I'm going to give you a very brief overview of what is a claims process in the car insurance business. Particularly, we choose this case, and Sebastian later on is going to actually go through and show you how to automate this entire process on a blockchain. So please meet Bob. Bob has just received his driving license. His daddy bought him a car, and they use the car insurance for their lifelong insurance partners, Bloxa. And he's a very happy person, and he's also always connected. So he is like many young people on the phone 24/7. He doesn't want to miss anything. So he does also in the car. He drives around, checks his messages, and you can imagine that doesn't go too well. Well, it didn't. So a split second, we all now into the car, just have a quick look who just called, and an accident happened. So it was nothing bad, so no one got hurt in this accident, but the car had quite a bit of damage. So he had to go and check with his insurance company, so he told his dad. So he went at home on the online system of Bloxa and registers his claim. So it has this new super form where he can fill out all his details. So he thought, meet Frank. Frank is the claims agent of Bloxa. Well, see, the front end is basically just a front end. So he sees the claims form, what first thing he does, he prints everything out, and he has obviously to check all the details. And what Frank does is he is very particular and puts all this information into the Bloxa system, right? The claims system. Then he goes over to his colleague, Alice. Alice, she is the risk and claims manager at Bloxa. And first they have to evaluate if this claim actually, or in what category risk this claim is. If this could be a fraudulent claim, or this is something we can fast track, or a standard claim. So Alice is going to go and check all the details, and then Frank goes and has been very vigilant and looks at all the information and fills out the forms. There's a lot of paperwork involved, I have to tell you. So he fills out all this information until he comes to the policy check, which is another status where he then basically goes through and checks, does Bob actually has a valid policy? Has there been any problems, and so on and so on. So he checks that as well. He's very vigilant. He puts all this information into the claims form and the documentation. This takes, unfortunately, a bit of time. He's going to go through a lot of, hoops, meets a lot of colleagues, drinks a lot of coffee, as it is with big companies. And, there's lots of documents that have been filled out, that everything is fine. He sees Alice a few times and some other colleagues and so on and so on. And then at some point, he blocks the risk decision management system. So Alice decides that everything is fine, and she gives Frank the green light. Green light means so he can progress the insurance to the next step. It's not done yet. He doesn't get the money yet, right? So Frank actually calls Tom. Tom works at Smart Motors, which is one of the affiliate companies. They work with this insurance company where they already told Bob to send their car for evaluation and ask him, okay, what's the damage? What does this whole repair is going to cost us? And, do you see anything else which sticks out? Well, obviously, Frank documents this process very eager also in all the claim forms, and make sure that the insurance company has everything properly backed up. It takes, again, a few days, and then Frank actually calls Bob and says, hey Bob, all sorted, your car will be repaired and you cover your insurance. So Bob installed the hands-free system today, so he is trying to be more precocious in the future, obviously. Now, this is just to give you a little heads up what an insurance process is going to be, and there might be some variation, but roughly, in a sense, this is the complexity of a claims process. Now, what we want to do is we want to look a little bit into how we can actually achieve that using blockchain technology and smart contracts in particular. But before I go and tell you how awesome all this is, I also want to tell you that there's still a few challenges. We are not at a stage where we can just start hacking and everything is going to work and sell productive systems. And the reasons why are, for example, these challenges that we have. Toolchains are moving targets. I don't know, there's not a day I hear Sebastian telling me, bloody hell, there was another update of software, I have to do this thing all over again. So we are actually moving in stages so quickly with software updates that this is still a challenge. You can't go into a productive system. If anybody of you have ever worked for an enterprise company, you know that the time frames before something uses in production are very long. Just a couple of examples from Triple or Web3, all the new stuff comes out. Another challenge is the massive community. But this is one of the good parts, actually. The reason why we move rather quickly in this space is because we have a fantastic community around, lots of people doing something. If you ever look at the stock exchange of Ethereum, and I'm sure that the developers here in this room will know that, they will see how many questions are there in particular cases. And I like to point out one of the top person is called Bukipuba, and I heard he's actually here. So, great thanks to this guy over there. He's answering lots of questions, so if you actually want technical questions, so go to this guy. So this is something very important, it's a steep learning curve, and we need communities, we need sources that we actually get this information from, because they are not there yet. That's something you have to remember, because before you go out and say, I want to build a productive system for the future, well, there are challenges. Another one, hacking, this is a big one, actually. I'm not going to go through the details of all the past hacks that have been there, but there have been many. I'm sure you guys have heard about them. Security is a big issue in this space still. From the products, from things that we don't understand, or things that we have to develop better. So, this also goes in very particular areas of best practice for security. There's lots of discussions around specifically the younger generation. Here in software development, they have other views on how we actually write programs. Well, there has been best practices for many, many years, and they are there for the reason. So then there's another point which goes also in the best practice of security. It's the readability and the auditability of code. Again, today, the very young developers, they just hack code up because they don't know better. How many developers are in this room at the moment? Okay, how many of you guys actually have done proper code practice, like from the beginning? It's already a few less. So, but this is the point, we have the ability today to actually get lots of information very quickly and start learning by doing, which is fantastic. However, the very importance about what is best practice, even discussion with developers that do you even know what best practice is, usually turns out in a fight. Like, you don't know what you're talking about, I know much more about you, and well, this is awesome, we need you too, but still, there has to be a common understanding, a common agreement how this is supposed to go forward, because this actually can be a security risk. Now, let's go and discuss a bit how the insurance in the future is going to look like, and for that, I give over to Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks for this introduction, André. So now that we kind of got a bit the pains of the real world today, we want to move forward, right? And if we want to move forward, and if we looked at buzzwords like interoperability, it means you're not alone on this planet, right? So it's awesome if you have a cool idea, but you need some other people to play along. Particularly if we are kind of in a distributed scenario with multiple players interacting with the same product, for example, an insurance platform. So what we typically see is people form consortia, right, or working groups where they define some insurances. And we do this thing right now, right? So André and me were sitting down, so we had a particularly small consortium, and we said, okay, we want to build a car insurance. So how does insurance in an abstract fashion actually look like, right? So we don't define the details, we just say, if we want to play with our insurances, we need to basically have a common understanding of what this insurance is. And after this exciting meeting, people came up with an interface, as we call it, of what an insurance could actually do, right? So this is now our fake insurance protocol, you could say, right? So we have fundamental functions in there, right? We need something to underwrite. So if I want to come in and get a new policy, we need this decentralized insurance to have some underwrite function. We need to potentially update the status of some insurance taker to find out if somebody is insured. We need to get the premium, because the premium could depend on a number of factors. So this is not to be defined here. This can be then defined by whoever wants to build an insurance. And eventually you might want to pay your premium, right? So you need a couple of functions. Hey, how do I actually send money to our decentralized insurance? And eventually we need something to trigger a claims procedure, right? This is some of the automation potentials in this interface for our toy insurance, which we're going to build. And after we kind of have a common understanding, okay, this is our insurance, we go ahead and can basically build it. But before that, I would just like to point out an architecture, what we're foreseeing, right, for our little car insurance. So obviously we have some driver which interfaces with our decentralized insurance. And yeah, first thing that happens, I might pay my premium, right? The insurance might see, hey, this person has never been here, I underwrite a new policy here. And one thing that is interesting is that you could say, okay, this is a closed system, right? This is it. And you can implement that in whatever shape or fashion, and you don't need blockchain for it, right? And that's cool, like that works. But down the line, you might realize we have so much more savings potential, because this is actually not just an insurance problem. Like if you look at some of the white papers, like at least as long as we had meaningful white papers in this space, you see that in many instances, people have like insurances as one provider that feeds into a system, right? So that we have an actual open system to which insurances very well could just be a provider. So not just solving the whole big thing, but it's one little provider that feeds into a ton of little things. And this, in my eyes, is a really interesting feature of public blockchains. Yes, I know it's like these privacy issues and scalability issues that everybody's working on it anyway, but if we're talking about an insurance system which is open enough such that it doesn't just deal with these two things, but maybe with a self-owned car, right? I know it sounds very much like sci-fi, but we're actually surprisingly close to this. What it allows us is I can go ahead to the self-owned car and say, hey, dear car, can I please drive you, right? And the car goes, checks, hey, does this person actually have a valid policy? Is that guy insured? And then the car could say, hey, okay, that I did drive, but something went wrong, right? So yes, there was an accident, which due to some fancy sensors, which again, IoT devices hooked up to this public blockchain, right? So I don't need to ask anybody for permission to please join that system, but I'm again a service provider that just feeds into it. Now, this thing reported that something went wrong, and a few milliseconds later, I'm also realizing that something went wrong, and eventually, I can initiate a claims process. So I interface this decentralized insurance. Now, whatever the claims procedure looks like can be defined by that insurance, right? And eventually, damages are being paid, right? So this is at very high level what we're aiming at. That we have kind of an open architecture which is general enough that it can be used for pretty much anything. If you look at these processes, this is kind of generic, right? So this has nothing really anymore to do really with the car insurance. So, which again is attractive, that you build a showcase, but it's very easy to transfer that showcase to something else, which paired with another thing which we heard here, including the Etherisk guys, they say, you know what, this is our insurance, right? MIT license, are you under MIT, or what license are you? Yeah, right? So go ahead, steal it from us, right? And this is amazing. Just go ahead, make your own showcase, right? Take this thing, which we do for cars, and make it for, I don't know, we had this discussion here about baggage, right? Baggage insurance, or whatever it really is, or drone insurance for André. You would love that, by the way. Yeah, so that's really the beauty of this space. It's not just about the technical things, it's also about the ideological changes that we have here of making everything open and to go ahead. So, what we're going to do next is we're going to actually build this thing. So, before we get into building, I would just like to present the tool chain that we're utilizing here for building all that. Who is in this room familiar with all the tools that I show here? Okay, some. Cool. So it's going to be boring for you. Sorry. Now, just a very brief outline what we do here and why we chose these tools. As André initially discussed, so we have these issues that tools are really moving very, very rapidly, right? So we have some abstraction around it to not really need to bother with all of that at the time when I code. What we also see is that we want to be able to audit that code, right? So we do make it available, so we have versioning, right? We use Git and GitHub specifically as a versioning tool. We use Yarn as a package manager, which makes it kind of reliable that the packages that are required are going to be around in exactly that version that I had. As the development environment, we use Visual Studio Code. I worked with Visual Studio for a long time. I was very surprised and happy to see that Microsoft decided to open up a little bit and give us this tool. This tool also has some nice plugins specifically for Solidity, which make our life in coding smart contracts very easy. Again, people who have never coded smart contracts do not expect this to really feel as if you do Java development in the year 2017. Do expect this to feel like, I don't know, give me some really, really bad example from the 80s. Yeah, okay, that's really, like you're in the dark and on your own. Except for Ethereum Stack Exchange, as we've heard. Now, language, unsurprisingly, we use Solidity. Again, for newcomers, I oftentimes hear, hey, there's all these different smart contract languages. In Ethereum, no, it's pretty much not. It's Solidity, and that's what people use. Then, very importantly, testing. We need to test our code. We can write unit tests and integration tests, and for that we're going to use Truffle. It's a tool that allows us to test our smart contracts in a sandbox environment. And finally, we're going to use this Solidity coverage tool to see, hey, how much did we actually proceed? What have we tested and what have we not tested? And what I would like to do with you now is to actually walk through this process.
Yeah.
Okay. So, here we come here. Okay, so first of all, what we're going to do is we have this code is open source, and again, you can steal it, right? So what I'm going to do is, let's see, I'm actually going to do some hands-on coding here. I know people generally advise you to not do that, but let's see if this works. Okay. So I just cloned this repository, which you can all find on GitHub, so there's no special things required. And I'm going to look in our ETH car insurance and see what's going on here. So I have the entire repository, and I'm going to open Visual Studio Code now as my development environment. And in the solution, we see kind of so the first thing that I see, which might be nothing new for JavaScript developers. I'm based on Yarn or NPM, so I have my package JSON file where I have a couple of scripts predefined that make my life a bit easier, right? So I can compile it, I can migrate things, which basically means just deploy it into my sandbox environment. And again, I use that so that when things change, like Truffle is again or right now also undergoing some changes from truffle 3 to 4, a couple of things change. You can use that as an abstraction layer. We also have testing tools included here. So let's go ahead, let's play with that. So first of all, I need to basically get all the packages. So I'm just going to do yarn, which is downloading these packages. For me, it works quite fast because I have them all in cache. Opening a second window here to start my sandbox. Actually, I can just write npm start, which is starting a test RPC. So this is our sandbox Ethereum blockchain. It behaves like a blockchain, even though it's just running locally. It's not connected to any other computers. And can very rapidly test it. Like, we don't have to wait like 14 or 30 seconds for one block, but you will see in a minute it goes really fast. We have a couple of accounts ready here. Each of them has 100 ethers. So in case you don't have 100 ether and want to get the feeling of how that feels, you can start that. All right. So now what we're going to do is I will just run a compile, right? I will just check, hey, does this thing compile? Does it work? And it seems to compile. Just to show some of the nice things of Visual Studio, I can just check my contracts, and you can compile inline here as well and get some feedback on things and issues, which is kind of nice. There's also a linter and IntelliSense, which starts working, right? It's things that you as a developer, if you're not from the blockchain space, you take for granted. If you've been here like for a year or so, you really start appreciating that we have at least some of the tools from the real developer world. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a migrate script, which is basically taking our smart contracts, compiling it again, right, because you can never be sure, and it's deploying this into our sandbox. I will scroll up here. So we see a bunch of transactions that are popping up here. Again, we don't have to wait for any blocks or anything like this because we're just running in our test environment. And finally, what I'm going to do, by the way, the test files we'll check out in a second, I will run a test. So this test is now running a couple of unit integration tests against our blockchain. We see that this was done in just under a second, so it shows that this test RPC is a pretty useful thing to do. And yeah, so this is cool. All tests passed. But the next thing we might wonder, okay, did I really test all my code? What does this really mean? It's cool that I see 5 green check marks, but how does it relate to the code, right? And there's a pretty nice tool that's called solidity coverage. So I'm going to run my coverage tool, which is now compiling this entire smart contract again. It's injecting some statements in between, so that every single step can be traced. And what we see here in his output is that I right now have 90% of all statements being tested. And this is not too bad, but we might now want to check, hey, why do I not have 100% test coverage, and what did I miss? So it generates a nice output report. So it generates an output report, and we can very clearly see, okay, this one file, this interface, which we defined before, this is fully tested, and my car insurance has a couple of things which are missing. And it's really nice because we can see here in red, don't ask me why it's only half the function that is in red, but this function claim is basically not being tested yet, okay? So let's look into our test and check why this function is not being tested and change that. So I'm going into my test, and only have one test file in here. And I see that, unfortunately, I have this thing commented out, right? So I have one test that is missing. So we see some standard JavaScript. So JavaScript developer will find this kind of convenient, which is good because there's pretty much no Solidity developers on the market right now. So what we have to do is, in order to get people Like many of the things look and feel very similar to standard web tools, so a full stack web developer will not feel totally unfamiliar with what's going on here, which I appreciate. In this kind of, there's discussions, hey, why did people come up with this Solidity language? It looks like JavaScript, is that exactly a good idea? Right now, I think we start seeing that yes it is, because the number of people that can deal with these things and that can handle these tool chains is pretty large compared to having something that's totally like self-baked. Okay, so I added my function or my additional test. I run my coverage report again, and it's compiling it again, running again. You'll see tons of stuff running here again. Yeah, we see things didn't really improve a lot, so let's see what happened here. So this function is being tested, but no, this one up here is not. This is weird, right? That's the problem with kind of integration tests, that you have interdependency between what you do. So what in my particular case happened here, actually, is that in this test, I'm basically running through everything. So basically, first I am taking a new insurance policy. So we trigger the underwrite function. We pay a premium. We pay a couple of more premiums just so that this insurance, which has no funds initially, has enough money so that I can successfully run through one claims procedure. I initiated the claims procedure, and upon that, my premium increased. So in this particular implementation, I said, okay, with every accident that you do, the premium that you have to pay monthly, so every 30 days we have to pay a premium here, increases. And that means down here, if I pay my premium too late, there's basically a code block that throws first, so I need to increase my premium that I send along. All right, you don't have to trust me, we can just run this thing again and see for ourselves. And things take a bit of time because now it gets compiled and some further statements get injected, and finally we have 100% of the statements being checked. If I check my nice report file, I see things are kind of well. Of course, like you see these E marks here, which means not all paths of statements might have been checked. So be careful. Just because you see 100% test coverage, do not assume that these are all happy and unhappy paths. And with this, I would like to get back here and and finish off here, if this thing loads eventually, that there's more than just testing. Yeah, testing is important, but just because you see this 100% test coverage, it does not mean you're fine. Okay. So first of all, and this is very important, we have to explain to people many times, this is not a college coding exercise, right? This does look and feel like JavaScript, but there's real money in there. And it doesn't matter if we're just talking about insurances, if we're talking about ICOs, if we're talking about a token, there's serious funds in there. You're not coding a new social media experience, right? If there's an experience related to that, it's usually a bad one. So use existing libraries, minimize the number of lines of code that you write yourself, and do tests, but also do audits and bug bounties that people could follow up on. And yeah, with this I would like to close up here, and I would encourage you to take things serious and to not stop playing with this new thing called blockchain. And thank you very much for your attention. If you want chocolate, after lunch it's outside.
Thank you, Sebastian and André. Thanks also to Validity Labs for sponsoring this event. So I should mention this, I waited for after the presentation. Only brave men do live coding on stage, so thank you very much for this.